Captain Alina Ward arrived at Fort Granite just before dawn, when the base was at its quietest and the air still carried the sharp bite of the night. The front gate lights cast long shadows across the asphalt as her vehicle rolled to a stop. The guard barely glanced at her face before checking her ID, his attention already drifting elsewhere. She always noticed. Fort Granite was not an ordinary installation. It was where reputations were tested and broken, where elite units trained before being sent to places that never appeared on the news. Soldiers here walked with a certain confidence. Some would call it pride, others arrogance. They had earned it, most of them. Multiple deployments, decorations, stories they repeated to each other when the nights were long and the silence too loud. Alina stepped out of the vehicle with a single duffel bag slung over her shoulder. No entourage, no dramatic entrance. Her uniform was immaculate but unremarkable, her boots worn in a way that suggested use rather than show. She stood for a moment, taking in the base, the layout, the patrol patterns, the distant hum of generators. Her eyes moved calmly, calculating distances and angles without conscious effort. A group of soldiers near the barracks noticed her almost immediately. "That her?" one of them muttered, nodding in her direction. Another snorted, "That's the transfer, you're kidding." They watched as she walked past, her posture relaxed but precise. No swagger, no hesitation, just purpose. "She doesn't look like much," a sergeant said, folding his arms. "Probably some staff officer they're dumping on us." "Figures," someone else replied. "Command loves their experiments." Alina heard none of it, or rather, she heard everything and chose to ignore it. She learned long ago that first impressions were rarely accidental. People saw what they wanted to see, and what they wanted to see in her was weakness. It made things easier later. Inside the administrative building, the atmosphere shifted. Conversations lowered as she passed. A few officers glanced at her rank, then at her face, confusion flickering across their expressions. She was younger than expected, calmer. There was no nervous energy, no eagerness to impress. At the end of the corridor, the base commander stood with a tablet in his hands, reviewing personnel updates. Colonel James Harrington had spent 3 decades in uniform and could read people the way others read maps. When Alina stopped in front of him and came to attention, he looked up casually, then froze. His eyes dropped back to the screen. He read the name once, then again. Captain Alina Ward. The file was thin, too thin. No service history listed beyond vague assignments. No commendations displayed. No unit affiliations visible. Just a single red tag at the top corner, small but unmistakable. Restricted. Harrington's jaw tightened. He tilted the tablet slightly, shielding it from view, and scrolled. Most of the sections were locked, classified beyond his clearance. That alone was unusual. That it applied to a captain was almost unheard of. He looked up at her slowly. "Captain Ward," he said evenly. "Yes, sir." Her voice was steady, not flat, not rehearsed, just controlled. "You're aware Fort Granite isn't an easy posting." "Yes, sir." "No special accommodations here," he continued, watching for a reaction. "Everyone is evaluated, everyone is tested." "I understand, sir." He studied her face. There was no trace of anxiety, no defensive edge, only patience. The kind that came from someone used to waiting for things to unfold. After a moment, Harrington nodded. "You're assigned to Alpha Training Unit. Report to the barracks. Orientation begins at 800. "Yes, sir." She turned and left without another word. Harrington watched her go, then locked the tablet and exhaled slowly. He didn't like secrets on his base, especially ones this deep. Outside, the sun had begun to rise, bathing the training grounds in pale orange light. Alpha Unit was already warming up, their movements sharp and synchronized. They were some of the best soldiers Fort Granite had to offer, and they knew it. When Alina approached, the unit's senior non-commissioned officer, Sergeant First Class Mark Rivas, stepped forward. He was broad-shouldered, battle-hardened with a voice that carried authority without effort. "You the new captain?" he asked. "Yes." He looked her up and down, not bothering to hide his skepticism. "We don't get many transfers like you." Elena raised an eyebrow slightly. "Like me." "Quiet," he said bluntly. "Most officers come in trying to prove something." "I'm not here to prove anything," she replied. A few soldiers exchanged amused glances. "That's so," Rivas said. "Then this should be interesting." He turned to the unit. "Listen up. This is Captain Ward. She'll be training with us for the next evaluation cycle." No one spoke. No one saluted. Elena didn't react. She simply nodded once and stepped into line, standing among them as if she'd always been there. As the morning progressed, the soldiers pushed harder. The pace quickened. Drills became more aggressive. Mistakes were called out loudly. When one soldier deliberately clipped her shoulder during a maneuver, she absorbed the impact without complaint and adjusted her stance. Rivas watched closely. He noticed how she recovered faster than expected, how her movements were economical, never wasted, how her breathing never spiked, even under strain. Still, doubt lingered. During a break, one of the younger soldiers whispered, "She won't last." Another replied, "Give it a day." Elena sat on the bench, cleaning dust from her gloves. Her gaze drifted across the range, settling briefly on a weapons rack. Her rifle rested there, untouched. She looked at it the way a professional looked at a familiar tool, not with attachment but with understanding. From the observation deck above, Colonel Harrington stood watching the unit below. He saw the looks, the smirks, the quiet dismissals. He'd seen it before, talent underestimated, dismissed because it didn't announce itself loudly enough. He glanced back down at the locked file in his tablet. By this time tomorrow, he thought, everything here was going to change. And none of them saw it coming. By mid-morning, Fort Granite had fully awakened. The sharp echo of boots striking pavement mixed with shouted commands and the distant crack of gunfire from the ranges. Alpha Training Unit moved as one body, disciplined and aggressive, exactly the way an elite unit was supposed to move. Yet beneath the precision, something else simmered: curiosity, skepticism, and a growing desire to test the new arrival. Captain Elena Ward felt it in the air. She ran with them, climbed with them, endured the same punishing drills without asking questions or favors. When others groaned or cursed under their breath, she stayed silent. When sweat blurred vision and muscles screamed, her expression barely changed. That alone unsettled them. Soldiers trusted effort they could see, grunts, clenched teeth, visible struggle. Elena gave them none of that. Sergeant First Class Rivas noticed. During a close-quarters movement drill, he barked orders faster than necessary, deliberately shifting formations mid-exercise. It was designed to create confusion. Most soldiers stumbled before adapting. Elena adjusted instantly, stepping into the new pattern as if she'd anticipated it. Rivas narrowed his eyes. During a water break, he walked past her and spoke just loud enough for others to hear. "You ever trained with a real combat unit, Captain?" "Yes," Elena replied simply. A few soldiers snickered. "Where?" Rivas pressed. She met his eyes, places that didn't use cameras. The laughter faded, replaced by a brief, awkward silence. Before Rivas could respond, a horn sounded across the field, 3 short blasts, training halt. That alone was unusual. Alpha unit rarely stopped for anything. A lieutenant jogged over, breathless. "Sergeant, command wants everyone at the main yard, full kit." Rivas frowned. "What for?" "Evaluation drill," the lieutenant said. "Live oversight." That got everyone's attention. Live evaluations meant senior command, observers, and recordings. Performances today would follow them for years. Promotions, assignments, reputations. Everything could be influenced by how a soldier performed under that kind of scrutiny. The unit moved quickly, adrenaline sharpening every step. The main training yard was already set up when they arrived. Observation decks lined with officers overlooked a wide open space marked by barriers, uneven terrain, and simulated urban cover. At the center stood a digital countdown clock, dark for now. Colonel Harrington stood near the edge with several high-ranking officers. His posture was rigid, his face unreadable. "This isn't on the schedule," one captain murmured. Harrington didn't respond. Rivas assembled the unit and snapped to attention. "Alpha unit present, sir." Harrington nodded, at ease. He scanned the soldiers, then his gaze landed on Alina. For a brief moment, something unreadable passed through his eyes. "Today's drill," Harrington began, "is designed to test adaptability under unexpected conditions, weapon retention, situational awareness, threat neutralization." The soldiers straightened. This was their specialty. "Five-man assault team," Harrington continued, "against a single operator." A ripple of interest moved through the group. Rivas turned slightly. "Sir, do we know the operator?" Harrington paused. "Yes." He gestured toward Alina. The reaction was instant. Some laughed outright, others exchanged looks of disbelief. One soldier muttered, "This is a joke." Alina felt the shift, the collective assumption snapping into place. This wasn't a test, it was a message. Rivas hesitated. "Sir, Captain Ward is new to the unit." "Exactly," Harrington replied evenly. A major beside him leaned in and whispered something. Harrington didn't look away from Alina. "Captain Ward," he said, raising his voice, "step forward." She did. "For the purposes of this drill," Harrington continued, "you will participate without a primary weapon." A murmur spread across the yard. Rivas stiffened. "Sir, with respect." "This is not a debate," Harrington cut in. A weapons officer approached Alina and held out his hands. "Your rifle, Captain." Alina looked at the rifle strapped across her chest. For a brief second, memories flickered: dark corridors, tight corners, weight balanced perfectly against her shoulder. Then she unclipped it smoothly and handed it over. No protest, no hesitation. As the officer walked away with it, laughter grew louder. "She's done," someone whispered. Another added, 60 seconds tops." Alina removed her gloves slowly and tucked them into her pocket. Her hands flexed once, loosening muscles. The 5 soldiers selected for the assault team stepped forward. They were the unit's best, strong, fast, experienced. Each one had won previous evaluations. Each one believed this would be easy. Rivas pulled them aside briefly. "Don't get sloppy," he warned. "It's still an evaluation." One of them smirked. "Sergeant, she doesn't even have a rifle." Rivas didn't respond. Alina was guided to the center of the yard. The terrain around her felt familiar, angles, blind spots, distances already mapped in her mind. She stood relaxed, arms at her sides. The assault team spread out, circling her slowly. They took their time, enjoying the attention from the observation deck. Cameras whirred to life. On the deck, Colonel Harrington folded his arms. A major beside him spoke quietly. "Sir, are you sure this is wise?" Harrington didn't look away. She agreed to the conditions. "Still," the major said, "this could humiliate her." Harrington's jaw tightened. "Or educate them." Down below, the countdown clock flickered on. 60. The number glowed bright red. Alina lifted her eyes to it briefly, then lowered them again. Her breathing slowed. The noise of the bass faded, replaced by something else, focus, sharp and cold. One of the soldiers took a step forward, testing her reaction. She didn't move. Another laughed. "She's frozen." From the observation deck, Harrington leaned forward slightly. He knew that stillness. He'd seen it before, years ago, on a different base, before a mission that never officially happened. The clock ticked down. 58. Alina shifted her weight just enough to change her center of gravity. The assault team tensed, finally sensing it. They were no longer circling prey. They were standing too close to something they didn't understand. And the drill hadn't even started yet. The countdown clock glowed ominously, its red digits reflecting across the polished helmets of the 5 elite soldiers. They were confident, trained to believe in precision and muscle memory, in brute force backed by years of combat drills. Today, they thought, would be simple. Captain Alina Ward was unarmed. That alone was enough in their minds to ensure a quick victory. Alina, meanwhile, stood in the center of the yard, calm and almost serene. The sun glinted off her hair as it caught the breeze, but there was nothing casual about her stance. Every muscle was controlled, every sense primed. Her eyes scanned the men approaching her, not with fear, but with the analytical calm of someone already anticipating every possibility. The soldiers closed in, moving in a coordinated formation. Their boots thudded against the ground in perfect rhythm. One of them, the youngest, a corporal with too much confidence and too little humility, stepped forward first. "Thought we'd have to actually try for a fight," he sneered. Alina didn't respond, she didn't flinch. Her quiet composure unnerved him. His friends noticed it too, the subtle shift in their prey's demeanor. "Move in," the team leader barked. The corporal lunged forward, expecting Alina to stumble, to retreat, to hesitate. But she didn't. In a single motion, almost imperceptible to the naked eye, she sidestepped him, caught his wrist, twisted it, and sent him sprawling to the ground. A sharp crack sounded, a joint locked into an unnatural angle. He grunted in pain, clutching his arm, eyes wide with disbelief. The other soldiers froze for a split second. That pause was enough. Alina's movements became fluid, almost a blur. The second soldier rushed toward her from the left, swinging with calculated aggression. She dropped low, grabbed his momentum, and slammed him into the dirt. He landed hard, coughing, disoriented, but not yet unconscious. The rest of the team exchanged frantic glances. Something was off. This wasn't supposed to happen. A third soldier tried to flank her from behind. Alina rotated on her heel, moving like liquid steel, and twisted his arm so sharply that he collapsed, stunned. Pain flashed across his face, but his pride kept him from yielding. The fourth and fifth soldiers hesitated, confusion creeping into their expressions. Confidence was their armor, and it was cracking. Their training told them to rely on brute force, but instinct screamed that something was wrong. Alina's stillness earlier had been deceptive, a deliberate trap. She had been observing them the entire time, reading each micro-expression, each shift in balance, each flicker of overconfidence. Colonel Harrington leaned forward on the observation deck, arms crossed. He recognized that calm, that predatory patience. He had seen it before, in classified operations that had never left his memory. A faint smile flickered across his face, the kind of smile reserved for those moments when skill and discipline meet arrogance in its purest form. Back on the ground, Alina shifted her weight, her stance barely changing, yet somehow signaling an unspoken command. The final 2 soldiers hesitated, unsure how to proceed. Fear, subtle at first, now tinged their movements. They had trained for years to confront unarmed opponents in drills, but never like this. Never with someone who moved like they already knew the outcome. The corporal who had attacked first was groaning on the ground, his arm twisted painfully behind him. He tried to push himself up, but Alina's shadow fell over him, stopping him in his tracks. She didn't even need to speak. Her presence alone imposed authority. The team leader barked an order, attempting to regain control. "Don't wait, engage her together." Alina didn't wait. She was already moving. With precise, deliberate strikes, she incapacitated the remaining soldiers in rapid succession. One fell with a choke hold that left him gasping for air. Another stumbled into a carefully placed trip that sent him crashing into a barrier. And the last, the leader, paused, realizing too late that his team had been eliminated before the fight had truly begun. In less than 20 seconds, the yard that had been filled with laughter and sneering confidence fell completely silent. The soldiers lay scattered, groaning and clutching limbs, their pride shattered in a heartbeat. The crowd on the observation deck was frozen. Officers whispered among themselves. Cameras continued to roll, capturing every impossible moment. Alina's breathing was steady, controlled. Not a bead of sweat marred her calm expression. She stood in the center of the yard, unarmed, victorious. It was not brute strength that had won this fight, but timing, awareness, and flawless precision, a symphony of skill honed to deadly perfection. The team leader finally pushed himself up, shaking his head in disbelief. She's not human," he muttered. Rivas approached Alina cautiously. "Captain, what the hell just happened?" She finally spoke, her voice calm, almost disarmingly gentle. "The exercise is not about the rifle, Sergeant. It's about discipline, awareness, control. The weapon is irrelevant if you've already lost in your mind." The last two soldiers still groaned on the ground, staring up at her. Fear had replaced arrogance. They realized far too late that taking her lightly had been their gravest mistake. From the observation deck, Colonel Harrington exhaled slowly. "She's everything the file implied and more," he muttered. The countdown clock, still running, ticked onward toward the full 60 seconds, but for everyone watching, the outcome was already clear. This was not training. This was a masterclass, and the lesson had just begun. The crowd remained silent, unable to process what had just occurred. The base commander's quiet observation had predicted it, but no one else had. The soldiers who had laughed, who had mocked, who had assumed weakness, now faced the bitter reality that skill and experience were invisible until unleashed. And Alina Ward had just unleashed hers. Cliffhanger. The last soldier, barely conscious, whispered to his teammate, We weren't even supposed to survive this." Meanwhile, Alina's gaze swept across the yard, calm, calculating, and ready. The exercise wasn't over, not by a long shot. "If you want, I can continue with part 4 next 1,000+ words, where Alina's controlled chaos escalates, neutralizing the remaining soldiers in a cinematic, high-stakes showdown that keeps the audience on edge." The yard was silent. A stillness so profound it felt unnatural. Dust hung in the air, disturbed only by the bodies of the fallen soldiers sprawled across the ground. Captain Alina Ward stood in the center, her posture calm and unwavering, as though nothing had happened at all. The 5 elite soldiers who had approached her with arrogance now lay incapacitated, or gasping in disbelief, realizing in that instant that their confidence had been a deadly mistake. Sergeant First Class Rivas, who had been observing from a few feet away, blinked several times, struggling to reconcile what he had seen. She just, his voice faltered. She took them all down, unarmed, in seconds. The soldiers on the yard were still processing. Some attempted to rise, testing their strength, but every move was carefully watched by Alina. She didn't need to attack. Her presence alone was enough to freeze them. The younger corporal, clutching his arm from the joint lock she had applied, looked at her with wide, terrified eyes. How?" he whispered. Alina didn't answer. She didn't have to. Her eyes scanned the yard, not with arrogance, but with focus. Every fallen soldier, every inch of terrain, every angle that could hide an attack, she had already considered them all before any of them had moved. It was not strength alone that had won the moment. It was calculation, anticipation, and an intimate understanding of human reaction under pressure. The team leader, the last soldier still trying to rise, stumbled backward, suddenly aware that his unit had been eliminated without any warning. His training screamed at him to act, but instinctively he hesitated. He had faced countless drills in his career, but nothing had prepared him for this. The notion that a single, unarmed officer could neutralize 5 of their best was beyond comprehension. Colonel Harrington, watching from the observation deck, remained calm. He had seen this before, though only rarely and under circumstances few could imagine. He didn't rush to intervene. He knew that letting the situation play out would teach lessons that lectures never could. From the corner of the yard, one of the junior officers whispered to another, voice trembling. Did she just do that in less than 20 seconds? The other shook his head. I don't know, but that wasn't supposed to happen, not ever. Alina's gaze shifted subtly to the remaining soldiers on the ground. They were beginning to gather themselves, clambering up, rubbing sore joints, attempting to regain composure. But she allowed them no time to react. In a blur of motion, she engaged them again. Swift, controlled strikes that incapacitated limbs, forced falls, and disoriented them with precise grapples. Every move was executed with surgical efficiency, leaving no room for retaliation. The soldiers tried to regroup, but it was futile. Panic began to set in. They had never been tested like this, not in simulations, not in real drills, not in any training scenario designed by humans. Every reaction they made had already been predicted. Every attack they attempted was countered before it even fully formed. One soldier, the corporal who had first attacked, tried desperately to regain his footing. He lunged, fists swinging in a last-ditch attempt to prove himself. Alina pivoted, redirected his momentum, and brought him to the ground with a seamless throw. He landed hard, gasping for air, eyes wide in disbelief. Another soldier attempted a coordinated strike with the team leader. They moved in unison, hopping to overwhelm her with numbers. Alina's movements remained fluid, almost unnoticeable in their speed. With a swift twist and a well-placed shift of weight, she incapacitated both soldiers simultaneously, one in a choke hold, the other disarmed and forced to the ground by his own momentum. The yard, once filled with confidence, now echoed only with the groans and gasps of those she had neutralized. The spectators on the observation deck were frozen. Cameras continued rolling, capturing every impossibly precise movement. Whispered murmurs rippled through the assembled officers. Words like impossible and inhuman were exchanged under breath. Sergeant Rivas approached cautiously, every instinct screaming caution. "Captain, are you?" "I am following the drill's conditions," Alina interrupted, her voice calm, even. "I have no weapon. You assumed that meant weakness. It does not." Her statement hung in the air, unchallenged. The soldiers on the ground, finally realizing the full scope of what had happened, began to understand. This wasn't about brute force. This was about awareness, timing, and mastery. Every action, every reaction, every second of hesitation had been exploited with precision. The team leader struggled to his knees, finally catching his breath. His eyes met Alina, and for the first time there was no bravado, only fear. The realization had hit him. He had been defeated not by chance, not by brute strength, but by a level of skill he couldn't begin to comprehend. Colonel Harrington finally spoke from the observation deck, his voice calm but carrying authority. "End the drill," he commanded. His tone was measured, but every officer present felt the weight behind it. Yet even as the drill officially ended, Alina didn't move. She remained in the center of the yard, her breathing steady, her eyes scanning, her posture untouched by the chaos around her. She had demonstrated control, not violence, precision, not recklessness. Rivas approached her once more, a mix of awe and disbelief in his eyes. "Captain, that was extraordinary, but how did you?" Alina's gaze met his briefly. "They attacked first," she said simply. "I only responded. Discipline is the true weapon." The soldiers on the ground slowly began to recover, though many avoided looking directly at her. Pride and arrogance had been shattered in an instant. The young corporal whispered to a teammate, "We thought we were elite." Another replied, voice trembling, "We weren't ready for her." Even as they spoke, the observation deck remained tense. Officers were silent, processing what they had just witnessed. Some had seen elite operators before, but nothing in their training or experience had prepared them for this display of controlled combat. The cameras recorded every detail, every impossible maneuver, every moment of stunned disbelief. Later, When the footage circulated through higher command, it would be studied, analyzed, and replayed as an example of mastery under pressure. Alina finally lowered her stance slightly, signaling the end of her demonstration. She had followed the drill, respected its boundaries, yet shown what true preparation and control could achieve. And in the quiet aftermath, as dust settled and groans filled the yard, one thing was certain. The soldiers who had laughed at her arrival, who had mocked her calm demeanor, would never make that mistake again. Cliffhanger. From the corner of the observation deck, Colonel Harrington leaned forward, eyes narrowing. He already knew the next phase of the exercise would push her further. He whispered to the major beside him, "We've only just begun. She's going to redefine what this unit believes about combat." The soldiers, still on the ground, had no idea the drill wasn't over, not by a long shot. The dust had barely settled on the training yard when the remaining soldiers, 2 of the 5 elite men, finally found the strength to rise. Pain radiated through their limbs, but it was not just physical agony that held them back. It was fear, the kind of fear that seeps into the mind when reality shatters the illusions you've built about yourself. Confidence, arrogance, and pride had evaporated in less than a minute, leaving only a raw, trembling awareness of how thoroughly they had underestimated their opponent. Captain Alina Ward remained calm, standing in the center of the yard with her hands at her sides. The sun glinted off her uniform, highlighting every controlled muscle, every slight, deliberate shift of weight. She did not move to attack immediately. That would have been unnecessary. Her eyes alone conveyed authority, calculating every motion of her remaining adversaries with deadly precision. The first of the 2 soldiers, a tall, muscular sergeant who had prided himself on brute strength, took a cautious step forward, trying to rally some semblance of composure. "Come on," he muttered under his breath. "She's just one woman." The second, a younger corporal, groaned and rubbed his arm where it had been twisted. He tried to maintain focus, but his trembling betrayed him. "We can still take her," he whispered, mostly to convince himself. Alina tilted her head ever so slightly, acknowledging their movement but not reacting hastily. That slight motion was all she needed. Instantly, both soldiers froze, their minds racing. Something about her stillness, her patience, was unnerving. It suggested not hesitation but absolute control, an awareness that transcended ordinary human perception. The taller sergeant made the first move, charging with a desperate roar. He intended to overwhelm her, to use sheer size and aggression to regain dominance. Alina shifted her stance, her feet moving almost imperceptibly, and redirected his momentum with a single, fluid motion. His forward charge carried him past her. A swift pivot, and she hooked his arm around his own leg, sending him crashing to the ground with a force that rattled bones but left him conscious. The corporal panicked, lunging from the side. Alina rotated, using his momentum against him. He tumbled headfirst into a low barrier, the impact stunning him and drawing a sharp gasp from the observing officers. Even as the corporal tried to rise, Alina was already advancing, her movements swift, controlled, and almost inhuman. She didn't swing wildly or strike blindly. Every step, every shift of weight, every redirection of her opponent's energy was calculated. Her opponents were reacting too late. Her battlefield was not just the physical space, but the psychological pressure she imposed, fear and anticipation as precise as any weapon. The taller sergeant attempted to recover and lunge again, but Alina anticipated it. She sidestepped and applied a sudden arm lock, forcing him to the ground once more. He grunted, pain shooting through his shoulder, and realized he could not overpower her. Confidence was gone, panic had replaced it. The younger corporal scrambled to his knees, clutching his arm and trying to form a plan. Desperation clouded his judgment. He rushed at her without thinking, swinging wildly. Alina's response was instantaneous. With a swift movement, she caught his arm mid-swing, twisted it, and flipped him over her shoulder. He hit the ground hard, stunned and gasping for breath. The spectators on the observation deck were silent. Cameras continued recording, capturing every precise maneuver, every tactical decision made in a fraction of a second. Even the most seasoned officers couldn't believe the efficiency and control she exhibited. Some whispered, barely audible, "She's unreal. This shouldn't be possible." Sergeant Rivas approached cautiously, keeping a safe distance. "Captain, are you trying to?" Alina cut him off with a glance. "I am maintaining control, Sergeant. That is the drill's requirement." From the far side of the yard, the tall sergeant made a final, desperate attempt to regain his dignity. He charged, yelling, trying to coordinate with the corporal. Alina didn't flinch. She waited for the exact moment, then struck with perfect timing. A precise sweep of her leg brought the sergeant down, followed by a controlled arm twist that immobilized him. The corporal, caught in the chaos, stumbled and fell against a barrier, utterly defenseless. Within seconds, the remaining two elite soldiers were neutralized. The yard, once filled with confident soldiers, was now silent except for groans of pain and disbelief. Dust settled around Alina's boots, and the sun caught her features in sharp relief, unyielding, calm, almost ethereal in its intensity. Colonel Harrington finally broke the silence from the observation deck. "End the drill," he commanded. His voice was calm but carried weight. "This is enough." Even so, Alina remained standing in the center of the yard. She had followed the drill's parameters exactly. She had no weapon. She had not attacked beyond necessity. And yet, she had shown exactly what it meant to master discipline, awareness, and control. The remaining soldiers lay groaning, overwhelmed not only by physical exertion, but by the sudden, undeniable realization of how completely they had misjudged her. Fear replaced their confidence. Pride had been stripped away. The lesson was clear and inescapable. Underestimating Alina Ward was a mistake that came with consequences far beyond what any ordinary soldier had expected. The cameras continued to record. Officers whispered among themselves. Even the junior soldiers who had been watching from the sidelines were wide-eyed, unable to process what they had just witnessed. The spectacle was unprecedented. A single unarmed captain neutralizing an entire elite team in under a minute. Alina finally relaxed her stance slightly, signaling the end of her demonstration. She had taught them everything they needed to learn about anticipation, control, and discipline. She hadn't done it to humiliate. She had done it to instruct in the only way some soldiers could truly understand. Sergeant Rivas stepped forward cautiously, still processing. "Captain, that was extraordinary, but how did you?" Alina's gaze swept the yard, calm, controlled. "Every movement, every reaction, every hesitation, they told me exactly what to do. Discipline is the weapon, Sergeant, always has been. A rifle is just an accessory." Her words sank in. The soldiers who had laughed, who had mocked her at the start, now avoided looking at her. Humiliation and awe replaced arrogance. From the observation deck, Harrington's eyes narrowed. He whispered to the major beside him, "This is only the beginning. Wait until she moves into the next phase." The soldiers on the ground had no idea what he meant. But one thing was certain. Captain Alina Ward had forever changed the way Alpha Unit would view combat and themselves. The dust still clung to the yard, shimmering faintly in the morning sun, when the final soldier, team leader Sergeant Kane, pushed himself to his knees. Every muscle ached, his pride had been shattered, and yet instinct and training screamed at him to rise. He wasn't just any soldier. He was Alpha Unit's top operator, undefeated in drills and evaluations. But what he had witnessed moments ago had left him unnervingly exposed. His team had been eliminated, incapacitated, one by a single unarmed captain. Kane's eyes darted to Alina Ward. She stood perfectly calm in the center of the yard, almost statuesque, unarmed, her uniform immaculate and her gaze assessing. There was no panic in her eyes, no aggression, just calculation and control. The young corporal beside him whispered, barely audible, "She's like a ghost." Kane clenched his jaw. He had faced live-fire simulations, ambush drills, and unpredictable combat scenarios, but nothing like this. Confidence, he realized, had been his weapon, and it had been dismantled with surgical precision. The adrenaline coursing through him sharpened his senses, but fear lingered. Not just fear of losing, but fear of being outmatched in every way, mentally, physically, and instinctively. He pushed himself to his feet fully, taking a tentative step forward. The soldiers around him, still recovering from Alina's earlier demonstration, instinctively stepped back. Kane's pride wouldn't allow retreat, not yet. He squared his shoulders, raising his voice to project authority. "All right, Captain," he shouted, forcing confidence he didn't feel. "Let's finish this." Alina's eyes never left him. Her breathing was steady, even measured. She didn't shift, didn't flinch. It was a controlled silence that weighed heavily on him, as though she could see every decision before he made it. Kane lunged. Every instinct in his body screamed to overwhelm her, to strike fast and use his remaining strength to regain dominance. But Alina had anticipated the movement. She sidestepped, letting his momentum carry him past her, and with a fluid pivot, she twisted his arm behind him in a joint lock so precise that Kane gasped in shock and pain. He tried to twist free, but every attempt only tightened the lock. Alina's movements were economy itself, minimal effort, maximum impact. She applied pressure in just the right angle, forcing him to the ground with a controlled sweep. Kane hit the dirt hard, the air knocked from his lungs, the taste of iron sharp in his mouth. The observation deck above was silent. Colonel Harrington leaned forward, eyes narrowing, utterly focused. Few had seen anything like this in decades of service. Cameras captured the moment, but even they couldn't fully convey the precision, the patience, the quiet dominance Alina exhibited. Kane's mind raced. He had been trained to anticipate attacks, to read body language, to exploit weaknesses, but nothing had prepared him for someone who could anticipate the anticipation itself. Alina moved not against his actions, but against his assumptions. Every feint, every swing, every attempt to regain balance was already accounted for. He struggled, attempting a desperate kick, aiming to destabilize her. Alina shifted her weight barely an inch, redirecting his energy, sending him tumbling forward. Kane hit the ground again, this time face first, his hands scraping dirt. His ears rang. His vision blurred. Panic threatened to overwhelm him, but he fought to regain control. The clock on the yard ticked down. 60 seconds. Less than 10 seconds had passed since Kane made his move, yet it felt like an eternity. Every officer, every soldier, every camera in the yard was locked on the scene, witnessing a one-on-one confrontation that defied every expectation. Kane tried again, this time feinting left and swinging right. Alina anticipated it immediately, catching his arm mid-motion. A subtle shift of her hips, a controlled push, and Kane was thrown backward once more, landing hard on the ground, his back scraping across the dirt. He gasped, pain shooting through every joint. His pride burned hotter than his muscles. This couldn't be happening. He had trained for years. He had dominated countless drills. And yet here he was, humbled completely at Alina Ward's mercy. Alina stepped forward slowly, each movement deliberate, measured. She didn't strike. She didn't raise her hands aggressively. She simply advanced, her eyes locking on Kane, communicating without words. "I am in control. Every second you hesitate, every flaw you reveal, you lose more." Kane's mind raced. He realized that any aggressive move could end him instantly. Fear had replaced his confidence entirely. Sweat streamed down his face, but he didn't notice it. His entire world had shrunk to one undeniable truth: he was outmatched. With perfect timing, Alina closed the final distance. She used Kane's own momentum against him one last time, bringing him down with a precision takedown that left him immobilized on the ground, gasping, utterly defeated. The clock ticked to 58 seconds. The yard fell into complete silence. Not a breath, not a whisper. Only Kane's ragged breathing, the faint rustle of dust settling and the faint echo of disbelief lingering in the minds of everyone present. The elite soldier, undefeated in every drill prior, now lay at the mercy of an unarmed captain. Sergeant Rivas finally stepped forward cautiously, his voice almost breaking. "Captain, she did it, all 5, and in under a minute." Alina stood tall, her expression unchanged. She had followed the parameters of the drill exactly. No weapon, no excess force, no theatrics. Yet she had demonstrated the one thing every soldier needed to understand: discipline, control, anticipation. A weapon was irrelevant if you had mastery of yourself. From the observation deck, Colonel Harrington exhaled slowly. He whispered to the major beside him, voice low, "She's unmatched, but the evaluation isn't over. The final lesson is yet to come." The remaining soldiers, sprawled across the yard, were silent. Fear replaced arrogance. Pride had been shattered, and every single one of them realized, deep in their bones, that they had just witnessed something far beyond ordinary training. Alina finally looked around the yard, calm, collected, and fully aware of the eyes watching her. She had not only won the drill, she had rewritten what these soldiers believed about strength, skill, and control. The dust had begun to settle across the training yard, yet the tension lingered in the air like a living thing. Officers and soldiers alike watched in stunned silence as the medics checked the sprawled bodies of Alpha Unit's elite team. 5 men, some of the best trained soldiers on the base, had been neutralized by one unarmed officer in under a minute. It was a feat that defied logic, strategy, and every expectation the unit had ever held. Captain Alina Ward remained standing, calm and composed. Her uniform was spotless, her breathing steady, her eyes sharp as she surveyed the soldiers who now looked at her with a mix of awe, fear, and disbelief. Her silence carried authority heavier than any weapon. She had demonstrated control, dominance, and skill without ever raising her voice or firing a single round. From the observation deck above, Colonel Harrington watched the scene unfold, arms crossed, jaw tight. He had spent decades observing elite operators, reviewing classified evaluations, and managing soldiers with decades of combat experience. But what Alina had done today was on another level entirely. Her file had been heavily redacted, even from his clearance, and until this moment he had known only fragments of her background. "Bring her up," he said finally to a major beside him. The words were calm, but the weight behind them was unmistakable. The entire deck seemed to hold its breath. Alina raised an eyebrow but didn't speak. She had expected this. Nothing about Fort Granite had surprised her yet, except the unspoken assumption that a single officer could be underestimated so thoroughly. A staff officer led her to the observation deck, and the base commander greeted her with a measured expression. "Captain Ward," Harrington said, voice calm but authoritative, "the demonstration you've just completed, it's unlike anything we've ever seen." "I followed the parameters of the drill, Colonel," Alina replied evenly. "No more, no less." Harrington nodded as if weighing her words carefully. "And yet," he continued, "you neutralized 5 of our best operators, all trained extensively in close-quarters combat and situational awareness. You did so without a weapon. You did so without apparent effort, and in under a minute." Alina remained silent. She didn't need to explain herself. The officers, soldiers, and medics who had witnessed the drill already understood partially, at least, the magnitude of what had just occurred. Harrington leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Most of the officers here are unaware of the breadth of your experience, Captain. You've been classified for a reason, and until now none of us could fully appreciate your skill. But I know enough." He paused. His gaze swept over the recovering soldiers below. "You are Tier 1. The term hung in the air. Whispers rippled through the assembled officers on the deck. Tier 1, the top tier of covert operators, the kind who conducted missions so sensitive they didn't officially exist, the kind whose names never appeared in records. Alina's eyes softened briefly, not in pride but in acknowledgement. She didn't boast. She didn't need to. Her record spoke louder than any words ever could. I served where records couldn't follow, she said quietly, where missions required discretion, precision, and the ability to act without recognition. That experience is what allowed me to respond today. Rivas, standing a few steps behind, felt the weight of her words sink in. He had seen her take down 5 elite soldiers with nothing but her body and mind, but he hadn't realized the full context. This wasn't raw talent, it was honed skill, sharpened in environments most soldiers would never survive. Harrington continued, almost reverently. You've trained operators that even the highest-ranked soldiers haven't faced. You've led teams in environments that don't exist on any map, and yet you volunteered to come here to evaluate a unit without revealing any of this. Alina's gaze drifted downward for a moment, her voice steady. I am not here to prove myself. I am here to assess, to ensure that those who will be sent into the field can perform under pressure. That is all. The drill was never about proving dominance. It was about evaluation. Rivas finally spoke, his voice tinged with awe. Sir, she just took down 5 elite soldiers in under a minute, and she's saying it wasn't a show off. Harrington smiled faintly. Exactly. Skill is only as valuable as the discipline that governs it, and she has mastered that in ways none of us can even imagine. The soldiers below began to rise, some gingerly, some still shaken, and all with newfound respect. The ones who had mocked her earlier now avoided her gaze, unable to meet the eyes of someone who had just shattered everything they thought they knew about combat proficiency. One of the junior officers muttered under his breath, barely audible, She's not just skilled, she's legendary." Alina finally addressed the unit, her voice calm but carrying authority. Discipline is not demonstrated in victory alone. It's demonstrated in preparation, in awareness, and in control. Weapons amplify skill, but they do not create it. Respect is earned through action, not assumptions. Never underestimate what you cannot see. Her words hit harder than any physical strike. The soldiers who had laughed at her arrival now felt the weight of their misjudgment. Arrogance had been stripped away in a matter of moments, leaving humility, and the raw understanding that strength could come in forms they had never anticipated. Harrington's gaze softened as he looked at her. "Captain Ward, the soldiers under your assessment today have learned something far more valuable than what any drill could teach, and I think it's time we let the rest of the unit understand who you truly are." Alina inclined her head, acknowledging him without hesitation. She had never sought recognition, and yet the time for concealment had passed. Today, the soldiers needed to understand not just her skill, but the principle behind it. From the deck, the unit below began to gather themselves, staring upward in awe and apprehension. Today had begun as a drill, a test of coordination and confidence. It had become a revelation. They had not faced an ordinary officer. They had faced someone whose history, training, and discipline exceeded everything they had known. Alina looked at the men she had just neutralized, now slowly recovering on the ground. Her eyes were steady, almost gentle, but they carried an undeniable truth. Skill without discipline was useless, arrogance was dangerous, and underestimation was fatal. A junior officer finally whispered to a comrade, barely audible, "We thought we were elite. We weren't even ready for her." Alina's eyes swept over the yard one last time before returning to Harrington. "Let this be a lesson," she said quietly. "Assume nothing, prepare for everything, and never let pride blind you to the reality in front of you." Harrington nodded. "Very well, Captain. You've done more than evaluate them today. You've taught them humility, precision, and respect, and in doing so, you've changed this unit forever." The soldiers absorbed the weight of those words. Today had started with mockery, arrogance, and a test of pride. It had ended with revelation, awe, and the undeniable truth that Captain Alina Ward was unlike anyone they had ever encountered. The training yard was quiet now, but it wasn't the calm that followed routine drills. It was the heavy, almost electric calm of minds being remade. Soldiers who had arrived that morning full of confidence, smirking and mocking, now stood silently, their pride humbled and their assumptions shattered. They were no longer Alpha Unit. They were witnesses to something extraordinary. Captain Alina Ward stood at the center, her posture relaxed but commanding. She didn't need to raise her voice. Every eye on the yard followed her, every mind instinctively acknowledging her authority. She had already demonstrated her skill, her precision, her mastery. Now she would leave them with the final lesson. Respect and self-awareness were as vital as combat ability. Sergeant First Class Mark Rivas, still slightly shaken, stepped forward. "Captain, if I can speak for the unit." His voice faltered, the words feeling inadequate. We underestimated you. Not just your skill, but what you are capable of. The entire unit is grateful for your instruction. Grateful and a little terrified." Alina's eyes softened slightly, but there was no trace of arrogance. "Fear is natural," she said quietly. "It is not weakness. It is a signal. It tells you to prepare, to focus, to respect the forces around you. But fear should never dominate your actions. Discipline must." The soldiers listened, absorbing every word, knowing that this wasn't a lecture. It was a masterclass distilled into conversation. Rivas glanced at the fallen soldiers who were slowly rising, still nursing sore limbs, and continued. "We've faced tough drills before. We've faced live fire exercises. We've faced instructors who pushed us to the limit, but nothing like this. You've shown us something we didn't even know we were missing, and we will not forget it." Alina nodded once. "Good. Remember that lesson. Confidence is important, but arrogance will cost you. Respect your training, respect your fellow soldiers, and above all, respect reality. It doesn't bend for assumptions." The soldiers' expressions shifted. They no longer saw her as an outsider, a transfer to be mocked or dismissed. They saw her as the standard, the measure by which skill, discipline, and control would be judged from now on. From the observation deck, Colonel Harrington finally descended to the yard. His steps were deliberate, his expression measured but proud. When he reached Alina, he spoke quietly, acknowledging her privately before the entire unit could hear. "Captain Ward, you've done more than complete an evaluation. You've redefined what it means to be elite here. The unit will remember this day for the rest of their careers." Alina's gaze met his. "I did what was necessary, sir. The soldiers needed a clear example, not just of skill, but of consequence. They needed to understand what happens when preparation meets arrogance." Harrington nodded. "And they do, believe me, they do." He turned to the assembled soldiers. "Alpha Unit," he said, voice carrying authority, "today's events were not a demonstration of superiority. They were a lesson in discipline, respect, and the realities of combat. Captain Ward has set the standard. Let that guide you moving forward." A murmur of acknowledgement rippled through the unit. For the first time that day, they felt a collective sense of humility. Not shame, not defeat, but understanding. They had faced a challenge they could not overcome, and in doing so, they had learned the true meaning of mastery. Alina finally stepped back, allowing the unit to absorb the weight of the moment. Her calm demeanor, her measured movements, and her unshakable presence had left an imprint stronger than any drill or lecture ever could. The soldiers were changed. They had seen firsthand the cost of underestimating skill and discipline, and the value of respect earned through action. Rivas approached once more quietly. "Captain, will you be staying with Alpha Unit?" Alina shook her head. "My work here is complete. They have the knowledge they need. The rest depends on them." With that, she walked toward the exit of the yard. Every eye followed her. Every soldier's thoughts were filled with the realization that they had witnessed something rare and profound. A living example of what discipline, skill and patience could achieve when combined with unwavering confidence in one's ability. As Alina disappeared from view, whispers ran through the unit. "She's incredible. I've never seen anyone move like that. We'll never underestimate her or anyone again." The sun now hung high in the sky, casting long, sharp shadows across the yard. The lesson had been brutal, direct, and unforgettable. The soldiers of Alpha Unit had learned more in one morning than in months of standard drills. They had faced reality, and in that confrontation they had grown. Colonel Harrington watched them quietly. A faint smile touched his lips. "They'll be better soldiers because of her," he murmured, "and stronger men and women because they know now that true strength lies not in arrogance, but in preparation, discipline, and respect." Alina Ward's name would ripple through Fort Granite, whispered in awe by soldiers who had seen what few ever witnessed. A woman unarmed, yet unstoppable, had transformed an entire elite unit in under 60 seconds. She had shattered assumptions, taught lessons no lecture could impart, and left a legacy that would endure far longer than any evaluation report. And as the soldiers slowly began to recover, gathering their gear and nursing bruised pride, one unspoken truth united them all. Captain Alina Ward was not just a soldier. She was the standard, the measure, the example against which all others would now be judged. The sun continued to climb, and the yard, once filled with noise and mockery, now stood silent, solemn, and profoundly changed. In that silence, a single lesson echoed louder than any voice, louder than any gunfire, louder than any drill ever could. Never underestimate what you cannot see, and never forget the power of discipline, focus, and skill. And with that, the legend of Captain Alina Ward was sealed.